Hey, this is Sky. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So today let's just talk about some popular Mafia myths. Let's burst a couple bubbles. I write books about organized crime. I've written 2 novels. I'm writing a third. I'm trying to get published. I'm probably going to get a movie made, at least of one of them. I have an agent that's trying to help me with all this. So, it's a topic that I've done not only a lot of research about, but I have somewhat of a connection to. My family is a very old gangster family. My father was in organized crime. My grandfather was a member of organized crime. In fact, my family on my father's side goes back more than 100 years in that world, with every single man in that family had been involved in crime in some way, shape, or form. Let's just start off with the greatest gangster who ever lived and talk about some truth about Lucky Luciano, Charles Luciano. Now, Lucky Luciano was most famous for creating the commission, which the 5 families, which later grew into 8 or 9 families, but started off with the 5 families on the commission, was a board of directors, is essentially what it was. In order to stop the violence that was existing in New York and around the country in the 20s and 30s of that era, it had been incredibly violent. It was a wild west of gangsters and everybody was shooting each other. And Luciano was incredibly intelligent and wanted to stop the violence, realizing that it was bad for business. And he wanted to create a board of directors that would manage and organize the rackets, and there would be rules. And it was brilliant. But Lucky Luciano wasn't perfect. Before Luciano became a member of the Mafia, before he was an associate to mobsters, because that's how he started. He was an associate for a very famous Jewish mobster, and then went on to, move up the ladder. He ended up becoming the boss, and I'm not going to tell the whole story about how he got his rise. But when Luciano was a young man, teenager, late teens, early 20s, that kind of thing, he was a street hustler, a heroin dealer. Now that in itself is a little controversial because selling drugs and selling heroin for a long time was a big no-no, was against the rules. In fact, in some families, mafia families, if the boss, the Don, had found out that one of his capos or associates or members was selling drugs, that was it for you. You broke the rule. The theory was that drugs brought too much heat, it brought too much time, too much prison time, and in result of that, of so many years that you could get for dope, you'd get a lot of snitches. And the general customer base was rather unsavory and untrustworthy. Later on, most all of organized crime moved into the dope rackets because of the money. You just couldn't avoid it. But Luciano got arrested for selling heroin when he was a young man, before he joined the Mafia. And he gave up evidence on people he was working with. Lucky Luciano gave the police information. Makes him a rat, technically speaking. The greatest gangster of all time. People worship this guy. He started off in a very, very questionable way. He was way too high profile when he became a member of the Mafia, a made man. And he drew a lot of attention to himself. So much so that it drew the attention of the police and the feds and everybody. And it was his own fault for getting arrested. And he has a famous history of being in prison during World War II and organizing stuff in Italy and all that. So he helped the government in order to, which was brokered by Meyer Lansky, in order to get reduced time, get moved to a different prison. He ended up getting let out because of the help that he gave to the government during World War II. And people think that's patriotic, that's great. But then he got deported. But a lot of people don't realize that the greatest gangster that ever lived, the smartest gangster, the most powerful mafia guy, the Don of all Dons, started off snitching. He's a regular Tekashi 69. Let's move on to the next one that I want to debunk. Now, any of this stuff can be looked up. You can Google it. There's documentaries about it, articles about it. None of this is opinion. Al Capone was never a tough guy. Al Capone was called Scarface because of the scar on his face. And you know how he got it? Well, Al Capone started in New York City before he moved to Chicago. And he was running with some mob guys. There's a rule within that life that you're not supposed to hit on or go after a made guy's woman. Well, Al Capone, thinking that he was too slick, for anybody to touch, was actively hitting on this guy's wife or his girl. He got caught doing it, and the guy confronted him. They got into a fight, and the guy slashed Al Capone a real good one across his face to teach him a lesson. Stay away from my chick. Better stay in your place, punk. That kind of thing. That stuff happens. Al Capone messed up big time. And he didn't come back for revenge. He was scared. In fact, the people that he was running with at the time, that he was underneath, he was an associate, they said, you know what? New York might be a little too tough for you. The guys here don't really like you. We're going to send you out to Chicago, and you're going to help the boss in Chicago run the booze rackets. And it turned out Al Capone was an incredibly good businessman, but he was also too high profile. He was in the news all the time. He loved being a celebrity. And that was against the rules. Al Capone, if people don't realize this and don't know this, Al Capone was not a Sicilian. And Al Capone was never a member of La Cosa Nostra. He was never technically a member of the American Mafia. Now, it's semantics, but let's make sure we understand. There's no such thing as the Mafia in the United States. No such thing. What we have in the United States is called La Cosa Nostra. It means our thing. There's a couple different variations of what people say it means, but that's how I take it. In Italy, they have the Mafia. So, obviously it's just semantics. People, everybody, myself included, refers to the Sicilian gangs as the Mafia. Technically, it's La Cosa Nostra here. Al Capone was never a member. Was not allowed to be. Wasn't invited in. They didn't want him. The commission was annoyed as hell with Al Capone for his entire career. Now, Al Capone went to jail a few times, went to prison a few times, and a couple times he did okay because he was able to pay guards and he had it going on. But when Al Capone got busted on his tax evasion or fraud case and he was sent to Alcatraz, he was wrapped up, he was done. That was pretty much it for him. When he got there, he was tested. His tough guy status was tested. Al Capone was not a tough guy. He got beat up rather brutally by a young, skinny black inmate. Whooped his ass. Beat him down. Stomped him down. Beat the fuck out of Al Capone. Taught him a lesson. Al Capone hid the rest of his stay at Alcatraz. Hid in his cell as most as he could. Scared of all the other inmates. They thought he was weird. Loser. He was not a boss on the yard. He was not tough at all. He ended up, when he got out, going crazy. He had a mansion down here in Florida. There's pictures of him fishing in a swimming pool because he's so batshit insane. He didn't even know. He thought he's in the river. He didn't know he's fishing in a swimming pool. There's no fish in the swimming pool. And he went out in kind of a sad way. People like John Gotti. I love John Gotti. But John Gotti was one of the worst mafia bosses that ever existed. Now, how can I say I like the guy but also dog him in that way? You can look up any of this stuff. John Gotti was a real deal tough guy. But the first mistake that Gotti made was that he killed his boss. That's a big no-no. You're not allowed to kill a boss in the Mafia. You're not allowed to. You don't get approval for that. I don't care what the beef is. I don't care how much you don't like him. You're not allowed to go and kill your boss. Now, that doesn't mean that happens. I mean, geez, we can cite numerous scenarios. But when Gotti killed Castellano out in front of Sparks or whatever it was, it's the steakhouse in New York, that set a snowball effect amongst the other bosses in the five families. In fact, I believe it was the Colombos, the Genovese, a bunch of them had assassination attempts on Gotti. And Gotti was ducking them, running from them. Sure, Gotti got arrested because of the big sting operation. They called him the Teflon Don, but eventually they caught him up. And they had all these tapes from the Ravenite. Sammy the Bull got blamed because Sammy the Bull, his right-hand man, turned snitch. Sammy the Bull put away, 350, something like that, people with his testimony. Went on the stand against each one of them. Sammy the Bull killed about 19 people and went free. He's free to this day. He's a free man. And he murdered 19 people. Who knows how many other people that he ordered to hit. But it wasn't Sammy the Bull who sent John Gotti to federal prison for life. John Gotti went to Florence, ADX. I believe that's where he was. I could be wrong on that. But John Gotti was in federal prison, Supermax. It was John Gotti's own mouth that got him sent up. This is the funny thing about Sammy the Bull. Sammy the Bull ratted out his boss because he wanted to take a preemptive step. The feds tricked him. And the feds were like, oh yeah, he's about to flip on you. And Sammy was like, well, fuck that. I'm going to flip on him. And there's some people out there, minority of them, but there's some people out there that think that Sammy did the right thing, right? Sammy didn't do the right thing. He's a piece of shit. But even if, let's go in a fantasy world, if Sammy had never ratted, what if Sammy stayed true? He stayed a straight up guy and Sammy never said nothing like he was supposed to. He ratted, but let's just say for the sake of argument that he didn't. Gotti would have still gone away for 100 years. Why? Because they had tapes of Gotti, of his own voice, thousands of hours of Gotti talking shit. Kill him, chop his head off, tell him Gotti sent me. I'm La Cosa Nostra till I die. Gotti built a RICO case against the entire mob. Gotti ruined the Gambino family. He destroyed single-handedly by himself with his own mouth on those tapes, destroyed the Gambino family. He was by far the worst Don that has ever existed. He was a thug, and somehow he killed his way to the top to become in charge of a $500 million a year organization, and that might be a meager estimate, maybe more than that. Be like taking a janitor and putting him in the boardroom up at a major corporation. He did not know how to run an organization like that. They were losing money steadily. He had no idea how to manage rackets on that level. He was awful. Now, people might be so pissed because I'm dogging John Gotti. I love John Gotti. But we have to be real. When Gotti got to prison, they didn't have a crew up in the joint that he was at. There weren't nobody to protect him. Just like Al Capone up in Alcatraz, Gotti got his ass beat by a black inmate. Some skinny black kid up in that Supermax joint that Gotti was in beat his ass. Beat the fuck out of Gotti. Showed him who the boss was. Showed him the pecking order of the prison yard. So Gotti goes to the Aryan Brotherhood, who runs the federal system, at least among the white inmates. And he said, I'll give you $1 million if you protect me from the black inmates, or if you go and assassinate, kill, get revenge, because I'm angry and I'm Gotti and I can't have this happen. So here's $1 million. want you to go and handle him. The Aryan Brotherhood said, okay, we'll take your money. And they took his $1 million. And they never killed the guy. In fact, a lot of guys up in prison say that the Aryan Brotherhood paid the black inmate to beat up Gotti in order to run an extortion racket on him, a protection racket on him. Now, eventually, the protection racket went dry because Gotti got enough of his own guys up in the joint with him to have his own little crew. So you got to give him that. And Gotti was a real gangster. He was a tough guy. He was not like a punk like Al Capone. Gotti was tough. Just because you're tough doesn't mean you can't get your ass beat in prison. But these are just some of the myths of the Mafia. I could go on and on and on. I don't want to make this video too long, but those are 3 of the most popular Mafia guys that have ever existed, and each one of them has their own little hidden story. There's always more to the picture than what's there. My dad used to, I'll end it here, but my dad used to say, you don't pay attention to what a motherfucker says, because people run their mouths. What you do is you pay attention to what he's not saying. You read between the lines. And that's the only way you can navigate these streets. And it's similar in the world. Everybody has something that they're hiding. History always finds out the truth. I'm sure I pissed off a lot of people with this video, and I'm sorry if I did, but you can look any of this stuff up. Thanks for watching.